Thank you for coming out on a day when there's a million choices. I'm sorry to make the mic noise, just wanted to get it right. So there's always a million choices, and we're very happy to be chosen to come join you. We're such good friends with Joanna Gabriel and with the folks at Unity of North Kitsap. We have a very strong heart connection with all those folks, and I feel in ways like we know you already. We are family. It doesn't really take that much equipment. Left to their own devices, the most disadvantaged of the world's children will concoct a game using any available materials, a stick for a bat or a rolled up sheaf of paper. A clothesline is a jump rope, a ball improvised and kicked toward a makeshift goal. When I was 11, my friend Hal, now a Methodist minister, my friend Hal and I played basketball in front of my house, each of us trying to hurl this ball we had over a tree limb that was maybe 5 feet off the ground, but it was still above our heads. At Mr. Harry's nursery school in 1961, do we have any other alumni of Mr. Harry's here? My playmates and I were right in tune with the era's zeitgeist, climbing all over a fallen tree that, in our imagination, was a spaceship. And who among us is not familiar with the Christmas morning when that much sought-after toy that someone's parent acquired by stealth, cunning, and lucre is discarded in favor of a game improvised from boxes and wrapping paper? We play games, and we really can't help it. I suppose some kind of game playing is hardwired for us as a species. For us human beings, along with all the other species that play games, if you've played with your dog, your cat, or watched an otter in the river or anything, along with games, for us, we inherit a recognition of structure, the presence of rules, and the sense of fair play. Now, today I do intend to give appropriate seasonal focus to America's national pastime. And no, I don't mean inhaling gallons of cheap Pilsner, concocting random explosions all over the place around the 4th of July, or where we live, really any time. It's Tuesday, let's blow some stuff up. Or vilifying everyone whose social and political views vary even slightly from our own. All of these are pastimes I'm not going to highlight. I refer instead to the sport of baseball. Now, I came here today to talk about sport, about baseball, about that instinct to play, and how the values we use in playing a game may inform our values in our larger lives. Baseball seemed like the appropriate sport to feature given the time of year. Of course, no talk about baseball could be complete without a sampling from this game's immortal, cockeyed spokesman, Yogi Berra. So I'd like very much to offer you from the Gospel according to Yogi a few inimitable Berra-isms, such as 90% of this game is half mental. Nobody goes there anymore because it's too crowded. You can observe a lot just by watching. It ain't the heat, it's the humility. When you come to a fork in the road, take it. Oh, he hits from both sides of the plate. He's amphibious. You should always go to other people's funerals. Otherwise, they won't come to yours. The towels were so thick, I could hardly fit them in my suitcase. After being told he looked cool once, he said, "Well, thanks. You don't look so hot yourself." I'm keeping that one in reserve in my later innings here, just in case anybody ever tells me once again that I look cool. It's been a while. And of course, Yogi's ultimate disclaimer: I never said most of the things I said. Not long ago, Sal and I had a chance to watch 42. This is the film about Jackie Robinson and his first season with the Brooklyn Dodgers, and what he and the team went through after his breaking the color barrier. Sorry again for the mic noise, especially those of you out there in internet land. Jackie Robinson becoming the first African American to join the roster of a Major League Baseball team. Beautiful film. I totally recommend if you haven't seen it. I'm sure you can get it at your library for no charge. That's how we did it. The thing is, this movie isn't really about baseball. It's about fairness. Now, if you haven't seen 42, cover your ears, spoiler alert, because I'm going to share with you a moment from the film, from Harrison Ford's portrayal of the Brooklyn Dodgers manager, Branch Rickey. An assistant asks Branch Rickey why he wants to draft Robinson, and he says, "Well, you see, Robinson's a Methodist. I'm a Methodist. God's a Methodist." In this film, Rickey decides to integrate his team. He signs Robinson to a contract. Now, 3 times in the movie, the young star asks the manager, "Mr. Rickey, why are you doing this?" And Branch Rickey gives different answers. It makes me think of Simon Peter denying that who the Christ is 3 times before the cock crows. Branch Rickey gives these different answers. At first he talks about the money. He says, "There's a lot of fans in Brooklyn who are black, and they'll come to the games if he's playing for us. And their money isn't black or white, it's green." Later he talks about how it's inevitable that African American players are going to join the league, and he wants to get a jump on that trend in order to win a pennant. But the 3rd time he's asked, it follows a scene where Jackie Robinson has been intentionally spiked by a base runner. And Rickey comes to see him after he's been stitched up. I mean, the guy's leg is bleeding, it's awful. Robinson asks him one more time, "Mr. Rickey, why are you doing this?" And Branch Rickey speaks at that point from the heart. He explains he'd been a player coach with a college team in Ohio. And a black player on that team had been treated unfairly. And he says, "And I didn't do everything I could to help him, though I told myself I had." That's interesting, isn't it? We tell ourselves we're doing the right thing sometimes, when deeper down we know. He says, "There was something unfair at the heart of the game I loved, and I ignored it. But a time came when I could no longer ignore that. A time came when I could no longer do what I had done, when I could no longer exist on these 2 levels and lie to myself." Ultimately, 42 is a film about fairness, but more than that, it's a film about the place in our souls where fair play registers. It's about our conscience. The truth it illustrates is that if we listen to our conscience, to our hearts, if we align our moral compass, we finally come to a fork in the road and we have to take it. And that is a place when we can no longer think as we have thought before. We can no longer live as we have lived before. When cruel words begin to stick in our heart, in our throats, or haunt us if we have uttered them, and when we find it impossible not to align our actions with our ideals. I know I speak to people who have gone through these crucibles of conscience, haven't we? We've all had those moments. In whatever games we are playing, whether they're on a field, in the workplace, in the halls of Congress, we can no longer ignore what is unfair or unjust. We can't play the game by the old rules that favor one side over another, or disadvantage someone equally deserving in favor of another for arbitrary reasons. 53 years ago this week, on August 6th, 1965, President Lyndon Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act, prohibiting racial discrimination in voting, enforcing the voting provisions in the 14th and 15th Amendments to the Constitution. At least the Voting Rights Act did all this in theory. Though, to quote Yogi Berra once more, in theory, there is no difference between theory and practice, but in practice there is. Now, speaking of LBJ, if you're a student of American history, as I aspire to be, you'll know that LBJ was an astoundingly effective legislator, a master of that process. And you may not be surprised to know that he could marshal a bill through the House and through the Senate, whether as the Senate Majority Leader in the 50s or as president in the 60s. We're not exactly saying that LBJ was a spiritual leader. I don't think he was praying in his office with Martin Luther King Jr., that he was channeling Charles Fillmore, that he and Emmett Fox held seminars together. But his biographer, Robert Caro, effectively makes the point, I've heard him say in interviews and in his books, that Johnson truly cared about those who were less fortunate, perhaps because at the root level he was one of the less fortunate himself. He grew up hard scrabble poor in Texas. Caro tells the story that Johnson had to drop out of college between his sophomore and junior years for lack of funds. And he spent a year teaching in a school in Cotulla, Texas, near the Mexican border. Caro says, no teacher ever cared if those kids learned or not, but this teacher cared. And the reason he has for saying this is that Johnson didn't just teach English and other subjects to the kids in the rundown school. He taught English to the janitor before and after school. Caro interviewed Tomas Coronado, who had worked as a school janitor, and he quotes Mr. Coronado as saying, Johnson would spell, I would repeat. Johnson would pronounce, I would repeat. So we can imagine that Mr. Coronado learned to say, my fellow Americans, just like LBJ. 5 days after President Kennedy was assassinated, Johnson made a major address to Congress. His speech supported the civil rights legislation then in progress, which JFK had been an advocate of. And several advisors urged LBJ the night before, don't focus on this legislative agenda. They said, don't do it. Don't make it a priority. It's a noble cause, but it's a lost cause. It can't pass The South controls Congress. You'll never get it through. To which Johnson is said to have replied, well, what the hell's the presidency for anyway? He went on to speak these words in his address. No memorial, oration, or eulogy could more eloquently honor President Kennedy's memory than the earliest possible passage of the Civil Rights Bill for which he fought so long. Asked by one speechwriter why he would make civil rights such a focus, Johnson related his experience teaching the kids in Katala. And he said, when I was teaching those kids, I swore that if I ever had the chance to help them, I would. Now I have the power, and I mean to use it. It kind of gets me broken up a little bit to think about somebody trying so hard to help others when they have that power, using it for the right reasons. There comes a point when we can no longer ignore what is unfair or unjust. We reach a point when we wish to repent, if you will. This is when we experience metanoia. This is the Greek term traditionally translated as repentance. But what it really means is having a new mind, having a changed mind. Your noia, your consciousness, meta, changes. Metanoia means going beyond the mind, the values, the judgments, and the prejudices we've previously held. A transmutation of our minds and our perceptions, and beyond changing our mental furniture. Metanoia also means changing our actions, our conduct. When we experience metanoia, we can begin to address unfairness in our own approach to whatever game we're playing, in our thinking about others, and in perhaps the rules and the structures of the game or the society itself that we are enmeshed in. We begin then to believe with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. that the arc of the moral universe is indeed long, but it bends toward justice, knowing that this is true perhaps only if we help to bend it. We begin to realize our own power and our own intention to use it. So as we play our games here in the heart of the summer, whether a 90-degree day or a blessedly cool, relieving day like we have today, I'd like to wish you all midsummer nights and days, not dream, but reality. A reality of embracing fairness, of being part of the solution in whatever fields we are in, and using our power for good. And remembering it's not whether you win or lose, it's how you play the game.